George yawned and fidgeted on the carpet. The light from my bedside lamp caught his blond hair and made it shine like a halo. He twirled a lock from his fringe around his index finger, let it snap back into place, and started twirling it again. The kid looked bored. He'd obviously agreed to come around mine for a sleepover because I was new at school and he wanted to see what kind of house I lived in. Get a sense of what I was like, but I could tell he was already regretting the decision. I thought you said you had a PS4. George's eyes flicked around the room as if he was hoping the console would magically appear from somewhere. We'd been upstairs since dinner. He'd explored my room and we'd chatted for a bit, then watched some random shows on Netflix. Things were going okay at first, but the last light bled out of the day and the sky outside darkened. I could tell George was losing interest. That was when I suggested we do something a bit different. Nah, I don't have one, I said. Sorry. Are you still up for having a go at this game, though? What, tell each other stories? His and that little kid stuff? George glanced at the watch on his wrist. I followed his gaze. George's watch was the first thing I noticed about him. He sits in front of me in English, and I spotted that watch after a ray of sunlight glinted off its face and caught my eye. It was a really nice watch. Most of the kids in my year gave digital watches, those blocky ones that light up when you press a button on the side. But George's watch was different, more adult. It was one of the reasons I'd picked George to invite over. Hey, can I try your watch on? George looked up at me and frowned. What? Your watch. Can I try it on? It's really nice. George stared at me a second longer. One hand moved to touch the strap of his wrist, as if to make sure it was still secure. Sorry, I don't let anyone try my watch on. My dad says I'm not allowed. He glanced around the room once more, his eye going from the door to the dark window. He sighed. Okay, let's play this dumb game then. What do I have to do? Ignoring the bored look on his face, I smiled. It's really easy. We just take turns telling each other a scary story. Like the scariest story you can possibly think of. Then whoever's is the scariest wins the game. George rolled his eyes. He stretched his long legs out in front of him. I don't know any scary stories. Besides, I think I might get some sleep soon. I'm pretty tired. Come on, just one each. You must know at least one scary story. Everyone does. Plus, I know loads of good ones. I watched George's face for a reaction. Unless you're one of those kids that frightens easily, that is. Then I guess you might not like the game. It was a risk, but George bit. I'm not scared of anything. The skin below his blonde hair creased into a frown. I've watched horror films with my big brother that are rated 18. We even found one on YouTube that's been banned, and I still watched it. I didn't say anything, just looked back at George and smiled. After a few seconds, he let out another sigh. Fine, let's play your stupid game then. But after you're done failing to scare me, that's it. I'm going to bed. George went first. His story wasn't bad, in fairness. It was one he said his uncle told him a couple years back. Nothing I hadn't heard before. Okay, basically, there are two kids, and one of them gets hit by a car and dies. After the funeral, the mother gives the surviving kid some money to go and get liver from the store, something to cook up for dinner. But because he's sick in the head, though, the kid pockets the money, digs up his brother, and removes his liver instead. Then later that night, the dead brother rises from his grave to come and get the kid in his sleep. It's a decent enough story, but I'd heard it 100 times already. I didn't let on, though. I made all the right faces and jumped at the right parts. George got quite into it. He gestured his arms, and his watch glinted in the light from my bedside lamp. His blond hair spilled across his forehead. He was so into the story, he didn't seem to notice. After it was over, he sat back, brushed his hair from his eyes, and grinned. "I thought you were going to crap yourself at one point," he said. "You might as well give up now anyway. I'm not scared of anything." I looked across the room at him. The house was quiet now, and had been for a few hours. When we'd first come upstairs, there was still noise coming from below. The faint sound of the TV in the lounge, the rattle of plates being put away in the kitchen. Now there was only silence. Beyond the bedroom window, tree branches rustled in the wind. The occasional car passed by on the road outside. That was it. I grinned at George. "So, you're not scared of anything at all?" "Nope, nothing." "Not even stories that are true?" George let out a bark of laughter. "Nice try. Just hurry up and get it over with, will you? I'm already bored." "Okay, fine." I shuffled towards on the carpet, so I was sat closer to George. Our knees were almost touching. George frowned, but he didn't move. "My story is about a family," I began. "A family that looks normal enough on the outside, but isn't really normal at all." George rolled his eyes again. He was starting to annoy me a lot by now, but I didn't let on. I just carried on with the story as if I hadn't noticed. "This family moves around a lot. They never stay in one place for too long. They can't, you see. The family's good at disguising themselves. They're good at hiding their secret, but they still can't go taking risks. If they stayed in one place for any more than a few weeks, they might get found out. Someone might discover what they really are." "So what are they then?" I wanted to tell George not to interrupt, to just sit still and listen to the story, but I bit down the urge. Instead, I grinned at him. "The family are monsters," I said. "They're all monsters. They travel from town to town, and they leave a trail of dead kids wherever they go." I paused, expecting George to interrupt me again, but he didn't. He only stared back at me. There was no expression on his face as he twirled the lock of blonde hair around his finger. "The family has a very specific way of doing things," I continued. "When they move into a new area, they found a house that's been left unoccupied. Not a completely empty house, just one where the people that are normally there are off on a holiday or something. One that'll be empty for a week or two. The family doesn't need long, see? A couple weeks suits them just fine. So they break into his house, and they go about setting the trap. It's their own kid they use. They send him off to make friends in the neighborhood, around the nearby parks, maybe off to the local school under a fake name. Tell him to get to know the other kids. The family is hungry by this point. Really badly hungry, but they don't do anything just yet. They've learned to be patient." I paused and took a breath. This was a story I'd told before, but I found I liked it more and more with each telling. The trick was not to rush, though. You had to savor it. I'd opened the bedroom window when we first came upstairs, and now a draft of cold air blew in. It ruffled the curtains behind George. Tree branches shook in the garden outside, the leaves whispering to each other. George watched me, not saying anything. I had his attention. "This kid's parents don't have to wait long," I continued. "They never do. They've trained the kid well, see? He's not just a victim in all this. He may only be young, but he knows how the game works. Once the family has been in the area for a little while, a few days, maybe a week at most, The kid makes his choice. He picks a new friend to invite to their house. The parents give him an incentive too. He's still too young to share the tastes they have, but they tell him that's something he'll only acquire when he gets older. But he still gets something out of it. What does he get out of it? George's eyes were fixed on mine. His finger kept twirling the same lock of hair over and over again. He gets the other kids' stuff, I replied. Whoever he picks, he gets to keep all their belongings after his parents are finished with them. Somewhere in the house below us, a door slammed. George's eyes flicked away from mine towards the bedroom door, then back again. I smiled at him. So, George kept his eyes on me as he tried to formulate the question. So, what exactly do the parents do? What do they do with the kids they take? Oh, they eat them, I replied. They eat their insides. They tear the kids open while they're still screaming, and they pull out their guts and intestines by the handful. Wolf everything down until there's nothing left but a husk. I grinned. Somewhere below us, a floorboard creaked. The sound was faint and muffled, and I don't think George heard it. Can you imagine what someone looks like when they've had everything inside them removed? They hardly even look like a person at all. It's like the stuff a snake leaves behind when it sheds its skin. The glow from the bedside lamp made George's skin look pale. His lips were slightly parted as he stared at me. But how do they get away with it? He asked. Don't the parents of the kids that get taken come looking for them the next day, when their kids don't show up back home? I grinned back at George. I'd been hoping he'd ask this. Oh, the family is long gone by that point, I said. They vanish like shadows in the night. The only thing they take with them is the remains of the dead kid, and their parents come looking for them the next day. They only find a locked house that belongs